Get ready, it's time for the podcast voted most likely to make you say, what the flock? It's the Talking Pools show. And here are your hosts, the dysfunctional duo of myth-debunking pool pros, Rudy Stankiewicz and Andrea Nannini.
Hold up, wait a minute.
What are we talking about?
We've been talking about main drains a lot this month, and part of that is because, well, main drain safety is super important.
Yes.
Right? Suction entrapment is really scary. And there were some changes we discussed last week to the Virginia Graham-Baker Act. We had Steve Barnes on, and he went through those. He actually radioed in satellite radio some undisclosed location somewhere on the planet. I'm not even sure where he was.
With Jeffrey Bezos?
Could have been up in one of those spaceships.
Okay.
I don't know. But we've been talking about main drains a lot. We're not going to talk about those so much today. But
drop it.
Aquastar Pool Products is a leading maker of VGBA-compliant drain covers and also offers skimmers, autofill, deck drains, cleaners, mosaics, ozone, chemical feeders, spa jets, and fittings to the industry. Aquastar's products are even made right here in the USA. For more info, visit aquastarpoolproducts.com.
Andrea decided to dive into a commercial pool for some unknown reason.
I dropped a pen.
And she dropped a pen and she swam to the bottom of the pool. And upon resurfacing, breaching the surface, I don't know what you would exactly call it, but once she got back to the surface, her eardrum ruptured and her brain has been leaking out of her ear ever since.
Well, it actually happened while I was under the water. And to be clear, I did not go all the way down to the bottom. And I wasn't even in the freaking deep end either. I was in the 4-foot section because I was right next to that 4-foot tile. And I just kind of did a dolphin thing. And I went up and I went down and not even to the bottom. If I had to guess, because I'm real bad with distance, I would say maybe 3.5 feet deep, if even that. And as I was in the
well, it's a 4-foot pool. So you would know if your face was 6 inches from the floor, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it wasn't. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't 6 inches from the floor. So maybe 3 feet. I wasn't even down to the bottom of the, I did not wipe my face on the bottom. So anyway, that's when I felt the water go in and I heard a ringing and then a muffling and then a pop. And I was like, shit. And it never really hurt, but it just would not unpop. And here I am a week later, still with the pressure that I can feel the pressure. It feels like an air bubble inside my ear hole.
And now you have this green slime oozing out of your ear.
No, it's clear.
When you wake up in the morning, your face is stuck to your pillow and you have to peel off on a vinyl air mattress.
That is not true. I had
all full of brain matter.
Ew. No. I thought it was pool water the first day that it happened, but it's a week later and I'm still getting goop. So it's ear hole water.
I don't know what you're talking. You know what? I have no idea what's wrong with you.
It's just my ear. It's not All
right. So on another note, let's get away from this because it's really weird and too much information. It's the brain matter oozing out that's concerning. So hopefully the part that's left can help us with the podcast. But we did get an email that I wanted to read. So this one's from Andrew Johnson. Do you know Andrew Johnson at Mirage Pool Services?
Yes, I do.
It says, "Hey guys, I love the show. You guys have an odd couple thing going on."
Thank you.
Super cool.
Awesome.
I was wondering if you could discuss pH and other balancing changes that come from the chemicals that we add. So then it says, also points out that their liquid chlorine does not add calcium or cyanuric acid, but they don't mention how much salt goes in with each gallon. So do we know how much salt goes in?
Okay, so I can tell you that I have actually tested the salt level in some of my chlorine pools just for funsies. And I had one, it was a residential pool. And this is maybe something that you can answer for me too as well, because I don't know the dosage and, the chemical changes on this. I just know that I had a relatively small residential pool that I only treated with liquid chlorine. I never added any, it was not a salt pool, and I did not ever use any Cal Hypo or anything like that, or trichlor. I only used liquid.
Okay.
I tested the salt at one point and it was 1,800 parts per million.
1,800 parts per million.
1,800.
That's a lot of salt.
That is a lot of salt. And like I said, it was a smaller pool and it was backed up to like a canal, so a body of water. So I don't know if maybe that had anything to do with it. Because I know that.
Well, it could be just from the liquid chlorine alone, because see, Andrew's absolutely correct. Anything you add to a pool.
Hold on. One more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing. I was going to let you know that I just, now that was a long time ago. Now I just recently did the same exact thing in one of my commercial pools. So this pool is a lot bigger and it's only liquid chlorine, and my salt level was 592 to be exact.
592 parts per million.
That's correct. And I know the volume of this pool is, I think, 149,000 gallons.
Okay.
And I add about maybe 2 to 4 jugs, which are 2.5 gallons each, of chlorine 3 times a week.
So now let me ask you this. Is this one of your pools that have a leak?
No, this is actually the pool that ruptured my eardrum.
The one that attacked your brain.
The final stop for this train will be Station A.
Yes. The one that doesn't like me, apparently.
So, well, here's the thing. It's correct.
I mean, there is a lot of splash out and a lot of like fresh water added because, there's a lot of people that use the pool. So it's a vac pack setup. So sometimes when there's people in the pool, it displaces the water. And so I have a lot higher water in my tank. And if you know how the vac packs are, you know how the top bolts down to the bottom.
Right.
Well, the water level gets up to that seam and leaks out.
So it does leak out of the filter sometimes.
Sometimes, yes. I don't think the pool itself is leaking,
From
but
the
yes,
surge,
leaks do
from
occur.
the surge pit.
Correct, yes.
Because there's too many people. All right, so Andrew's correct in that there is no cyanuric acid, there is no calcium in sodium hypochlorite, which is liquid chlorine, but there is a lot of salt. He's right. In fact, a gallon of sodium hypochlorite.
It's in the name.
It says salt. Yes, that's right, sodium. So a gallon of
it's in the name.
A gallon of sodium hypochlorite contains 2.34 pounds of solids. Now that's not all salt, but that's a lot of solids going in. It's mostly salt.
Say that again.
2.34 pounds of solids. So again, like I said, it's not 100% salt in that 2.34 pounds, but there's a lot of salt in that. And we expect that.
And you said in 1 gallon?
About 10 ounces of salt, which, gives you 8 parts per million of salt when you enter it, when you first add it anyway. And then as the chlorine degrades and uses itself up, you get another 7 or 8 pounds, another 7 or 8 parts per million of salt, which gives you an end total of about 15 parts per million of salt from that 1 gallon of liquid chlorine in a 10,000 gallon pool.
1 gallon is 2-point-something pounds of solids. Gotcha.
2.34 pounds of solids. So when you add 1 gallon of 12%
sodium hypochlorite,
you're adding 12 parts per million of free chlorine, which is kind of cool with liquid chlorine because that's one of those things where a gallon in 10,000 gallons of water gives you the same parts per million as the percentage of available of chlorine in that gallon.
Oh, that is cool.
So if it was a gallon of 10% sodium hypochlorite, that 1 gallon in 10,000 gallons of water would give you 10.
Sweet.
10 parts per million. So what about a gallon of household bleach? That's
6%
available chlorine.
Non-splash kind.
So what would that give me? Not the splashless. What would that give me?
6.
So then we have to get into mind that it will also increase the total dissolved solids. It's going to add 12 parts per million of free chlorine, but it's also going to increase the total dissolved solids by 28 parts per million.
Okay.
So, Andrew, that's the number that you're looking at when you're measuring salt. So we're getting pretty close to 15 parts per million in a 10,000 gallon pool with every gallon of liquid chlorine that you add.
So now for total dissolved solids, though, there's no minimum or maximum, right? The level that they recommend is 1,500 parts per million over the starting level, like when the pool was filled up, pretty much, correct?
With the exception of salt pools. So that's when you're supposed to drain and refill, is when your total dissolved solid, at least partially drain and refill, if not completely. When your total dissolved solids level increases 1,500 parts per million over what you started with, that's when it's time to replace water.
1 pound of anything dissolved into 10,000 gallons of water will increase the total dissolved solids in that pool by 12 parts per million.
And then when you have a salt pool, you have to subtract the salt level from the total dissolved solid. Total dissolved solid.
Well, with a salt pool, the first thing we do is add 3,000 parts per million of salt to the water. So we're already exceeding the 1,500 parts per million over what we started.
Right.
So the best thing to do with a salt pool, usually your salt cell in the instructions gives you some range that you should keep the salt level in, right? So most that you see residential are going to say that you should keep the salt level between 3,000 and 4,000 parts per million.
Okay.
So with a salt pool, what you should do is shoot for that 3,000 parts per million. When it raises to 4,000 parts per million, then drain and refill to the point that you're back at 3,000.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
So just use that range. If you're not sure what you started with, because the water's been in the pool for years, and trust me, this does take years in some cases to occur, test your fill water. Whether it's coming out of a garden hose or an autofill, test the water that comes out of that, see what the total dissolved solids is. That's going to be what you started with, or at least as close to it as possible.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it gives you an idea.
And you can also test that for phosphates,
You
too.
could.
So see if you're adding phosphates. Well,
Because you should test your fill water on a regular basis, so that way you know what you're putting into the pool, because you might have trace levels of copper, you might have trace levels of iron. You're correct. A lot of water treatment companies use phosphates to treat their drinking water. A lot of water companies use chloramines to treat their drinking water. So it's good.
I was just going to say, so then you would have chloramines in the water?
You would. You'd
too?
be introducing them every time you topped off the pool. So it's good to know what you're putting in, because it helps you to come up with some kind of plan to combat it. Because when water evaporates, the only thing that leaves the pool is water. So anything that's put into the pool, like we mentioned, those trace levels of copper, iron, phosphates, whatever.
Some places have really high calcium.
Could be
in source
calcium.
water, too.
Yeah, those levels are just going to increase over time because they don't leave with the evaporated water. You add more to it, which increases the quantity of those things in that body of water.
Not by any means scientific tests, but, I've kept track of things, and I don't know, the pH, I've added chlorine without adding acid, and my pH just kind of stays the same, unless some weird thing happens in the pool.
Right.
And I'm talking about going back the next day. I'm not talking about waiting a week.
Ear juice.
Oh, you know what? You're going
to test the ear juice.
me dip a pool strip in my ear hole to see what the pH of my brain juice is.
All right. So we're going to find out the pH of Andrea's brain later today. So either does or doesn't increase the pH, man. That's a big question. A lot of folks say it does. A lot of folks say it doesn't. And I'm going to say it depends on where you're getting your liquid chlorine from.
Okay. Why?
Why? Well, we know that the initial dose is going to increase your pH. That's just going to happen.
Right.
Sodium hypochlorite has a pH of 13. You pour it into the pool, it's going to increase the pH. However, the process in which chlorine uses itself up is an acidic process. So over time, as that chlorine uses itself up, it actually brings that pH back down pretty close to where you started from.
Which is what I've experienced. Yes.
Which is what you're experiencing. But there are also manufacturers, and a lot of them, not a few, that put in extra sodium hydroxide, which is also known as caustic soda or lye. They add extra sodium hydroxide to the liquid chlorine to increase its shelf life.
Don't they use that in lutefisk? Isn't that how you make lutefisk? We'll have to ask Eric Jorgensen. I saw it. Never mind. Go ahead. Continue.
I don't know what the lutefisk is.
You don't? It's disgusting. It looks disgusting. I don't know.
Why would Eric know?
Because he's from that area where they make it, and it's a staple. I think he's even mentioned, I think I made fun of him for it. And he's like, yeah, I know what it is.
Okay.
It's like a
we're
fish.
going to leave this in and see if you're still friends afterwards.
It's like a kind of a fish thing that they do. And I think they like I don't, it's like a jelly. I think, is it like jellied? I'm going to Google it while you're talking.
Fish jelly.
It's fish
So it's
jelly.
kind of the consistency of the shit that's coming out of your ear.
Shut up.
All right, let's get back to this. To Andrew's question is going to take a really long time to answer, apparently. So anyway, so in those areas where they
lutefisk is a dried white fish, and it is made from aged stockfish and pickled in lye. See, it's gelatinous in texture after being rehydrated for days prior to eating. I was correct.
Well, there you go. We learned something new. Lutefisk, not Ludacris. He's the rapper.
That's right.
So this is different. But lutefisk is a gelatinous fish served in Minnesota?
Well, yeah. I mean, it comes from, like it said, it comes from Nordic countries, but they're all Vikings over there in Minnesota. So
in Minnesota, thus okay.
I mean,
all right. So anyway.
Okay.
So in those areas where they do add additional sodium hydroxide to the liquid chlorine, which they say it makes it more stable, what it really is doing is increasing the shelf life, because what they're doing is they're increasing the pH of the product. And we know at a higher pH, chlorine is what?
Ineffective.
Well, yeah, less effective, much less effective, right?
Yeah.
So if it's less effective, it's not, and we know it only uses itself up when it sanitizes and disinfects. If it's not doing that, that means it's not using itself up, which means it's going to last longer, which is why they put the additional lye in the product. In those cases, your pH is not going to come back down. So adding sodium hypochlorite will result in an increase in pH, and you will have to add muriatic acid to lower the pH after the dose.
Rudy and Andrea have just stated that many liquid chlorine manufacturers use additional lye in their secret sodium hypochlorite formula in order to increase the shelf life of the product. This practice does not affect the effectiveness of the sodium hypochlorite as a sanitizer when added to the swimming pool water.
So we just ended the debate then. Everybody's right.
Yes.
Cool.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, we see. We're out here doing work.
But we're going to start another one now.
Uh-oh.
So I have to lower my pH. What am I adding to do that?
Muriatic acid or sulfuric?
Muriatic acid. And can I add muriatic acid and just lower the pH?
No, because you're going to lower the total alkalinity.
That's correct. Even though some folks say you can add acid in a certain way so that it only lowers one and doesn't affect the other.
And that doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry, but it just never has.
Well, it's a myth.
Okay.
We know that acid columns, or sometimes they call it an acid slug, that doesn't really do what it's said to do. Folks believe if you pour the acid slowly all into one spot, that it will, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of hate mail over this one too. If we pour the acid slowly all into one spot, we'll burn off bicarbonate like crazy, but won't affect the pH. The problem with that is muriatic acid is hydrochloric acid, and every time you add hydrochloric acid to water, it dissociates into both hydrogen and chloride. pH is the measurement of hydrogen activity in that body of water. So it's impossible to not affect the measurement of hydrogen activity by adding more hydrogen.
I see.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm trying to come up with a witty analogy for it, but I might f*** up and sound stupid, so I'm just going to shut up.
I don't have a good one. I've tried coming up with a good analogy. Well, let's talk more about our muriatic acid, because we add muriatic acid to lower the pH. It is also going to lower the total alkalinity. We know that. Mm-hmm. So Andrew is out there. He adds his sodium hypochlorite, 2.3.4 pounds of solids. It increases his free chlorine by 12 parts per million. He also increased his salt level by pretty close to 15 parts per million in that 10,000 gallon pool. Now he has to add muriatic acid, right, to counter the increase in pH, because the sodium hypochlorite he buys has additional sodium hydroxide in it. So he adds that muriatic acid to lower the pH, happens to also lower the total alkalinity. That cup of muriatic acid he added increases the total dissolved solids by another 1.4 parts per million.
So this is so weird, and this is just me telling you this. You can keep it in if you want to. I was literally thinking about this today at one of the pools I was in, and I cannot remember why. I think it was just...
That's because you have that ESPN thing going on.
I think I do a little bit. No, but for real, I had all of this...
What do they call that? Psycho, right? Psycho? No, psychic. I'm sorry. You're somewhere in between.
Yeah, yes. Anyway, so I was literally thinking about this all day today for some reason. And so what did you say? Oh, that's what I was saying. Like everything that you add to a pool is going to increase the total dissolved solids. And then in my head, I was like, well, what about acid? Because acid is basically going to dissolve everything, right? How can that add solids? You just blew my mind, honestly. That's right. No. That was not, I just blew out some ear juice with that fact that you just...
This is way too much information, and you're turning our podcast into some type of horror stories. You and your leaking head.
Well, if anybody that writes movies is listening,
we gotta get Alex credit, back please. On. He can write a whole.
Yeah, for sure.
He can write a whole movie. He can do a whole movie about your leaking head. So
blowing out my eardrum.
Exactly.
With facts.
All right. So what about some other things? What about trichlor? What does that add?
Well, that adds stabilizer or cyanuric acid. I would imagine it increases the total. Why can't I do that? Total dissolved solids.
Let's just call it TDS.
We can do that, I guess.
Well, being you can't pronounce the other one, let's go with...
I can pronounce each word separately. I just can't put them together for some reason.
TDS.
All
right.
Total dissolved solids.
Yes, perfect. All right. So 2 tablets weigh roughly 15 ounces of the 3-inch trichlor tablets, right? So almost
about a half a pound.
No, almost a pound. Well,
you said 2 tablets.
Yeah, 2.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
So,
sorry.
And 15 ounces of trichlor is going to add 10 parts per million of free chlorine to 10,000 gallons of water. But You're correct. It will also increase the cyanuric acid. It's going to increase it that same dose, 15 ounces of trichlor. That's 2 3-inch tablets into a 10,000 gallon swimming pool. They're also going to increase the cyanuric acid level by 6 parts per million.
Wayne would say 6 to 7-ish.
Wayne's not here. He could be. But 6 parts per million.
So 2 tabs are going to give you 12 to 14-ish, say, parts per million of cyanuric acid.
No.
In 10,000
2 tablets
pounds.
is going to give me 6 parts per million. You're not paying attention.
Oh, I thought one tablet is 6 parts per million.
No. Oh. 1 tablet's going to give you 3.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm totally... No.
1
You're
pound.
Correct. I got confused.
Between pounds and tablets. You've mixed them up.
That's correct.
Yeah, the 3 different measures we use in the pool industry. There's liquid measure by weight, and measure by tablet.
I mean,
why? Why do I agree to do this? All right. Anyway,
work and my ear is f***ing up my equilibrium.
He did ask about calcium hypochlorite. So now, remember what you said about liquid chlorine, the effect on pH? That is true for calcium hypochlorite.
So it does raise the pH, calcium hypochlorite.
It raises it, but it only raises it temporarily. Because again,
both of those things.
The process in which chlorine uses itself up is an acidic process. It's not immediate. You have to have patience. You add your dose of calcium hypochlorite, the pH is going to be a little bit higher because of that. And it's not going to be something that dissipates in an hour. It'll probably take a day or 2 before it actually comes back down.
Right.
So you have to be patient, but left alone, it's going to come back down. The pH will come back down pretty much to where it started with because of that acidic process.
Okay. So I don't use Cal Hypo really all that often. I did for a while and I started to like it, and then
you got over it?
No, it's just that I was asked not to use it, so I had to stop. And then also, it's like when I was buying it, like the one time I ordered a 100-pound bucket, and I would get the 1-pound bags.
They do that?
So a 100-pound bucket of 1-pound bags.
They come in a bucket of bags?
Just because it was, yeah. Anyway, so they do. They come bagged in a bucket. So anyway, I had that, and they, like, I ordered it because I had to call ahead because they would be like, oh, we don't have it in stock, but we can get it next week. And I'm like, all right. But they gave me one time that was covered in like an inch layer of like black dust because nobody ever buys it. And it was like just sitting there.
So in South Florida, nobody buys calcium hypochlorite?
Nobody that I know.
Okay. I used calcium hypochlorite religiously, but I also started out in different markets. I started in Houston. I ended up in New Jersey, Long Island, and then ultimately down here in Florida. Florida is a huge liquid chlorine market, but
yes,
I thought the Cal Hypo only took up a small footprint in my truck. I didn't have to make multiple trips back and forth to fill my carboys, the 2.5 gallon jugs. And I did like my tailgate. You'll see in a lot of cases, folks that carry liquid chlorine over time, the better their truck starts to show the evidence of it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like I said, I started to like get used to at first for me switching, because what happened, the reason that I started using the Cal Hypo is because I had some issues with the only service truck that I had. And so I was one of those people that you saw I happened to do pools out of a Mazda 3 hatchback for a few months.
I remember that. I saw that.
Yeah.
I yelled at you about it.
I know. Well, I mean, I had to do what I had to do. So, but I switched to Cal Hypo for that short time because obviously how am I going to take care of all the pools that I had by shoving liquid chlorine into a tiny car? I mean, just trying to drive with the fumes of the liquid chlorine was ridiculous.
Well,
anyway,
that's why I yelled at you, if you remember. It wasn't the fact that you were using something that wasn't a truck. I just wanted you to do whatever you were doing safely.
I only had like 2 to 4 jugs in the back of there. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should, do something different. So that's when I started getting the Cal Hypo. And then I figured in the bags was better than having just an open container of Cal Hypo in the back of my truck as well. That's why I got the bags, because each little thing was self-contained. Okay.
So you had less fumes because of the bags?
Yeah. And I guess
having it pre-measured is pretty cool, but...
Well, because then I could back to my original point was when I first switched over from using Cal Hypo or from using liquid chlorine to Cal Hypo, it took me a little while to get the dosage right. So I was like, well, because normally I would be like, okay, this pool gets 1 jug, which, like I mentioned, is 2.5 gallons. So I was like, all right, 1 bag, 1 jug, 1 bag. Well, that wasn't it. It's closer to 2 bags is going to equal the 2.5 gallons, obviously, depending on the volume of the pool. But that's what I found worked for me. But this is what I was going to say. I did have problems with the cloud in the pool. So I don't know if because I would have it be cloudy still up until the next day. And I would have customers complaining, which is part of the reason why they didn't want me to use Cal Hypo anymore, is because they would be like, it's still cloudy after, 24 hours. And I would have to go back and dump a bunch of acid in. And
well, to answer a couple of your questions really quick. So 1 gallon, we said that 1 gallon of liquid chlorine in 10,000 gallons of water will give you in parts per million, whatever that percentage is, correct? Mm-hmm. So if you had 1 gallon of 10% liquid chlorine, that would give you 10 parts per million in 10,000 gallons of water.
Gotcha.
Which is the same that 15 ounces of trichlor tablets would give you in 10,000 gallons of water. That also gives you 10 parts per million, which is the same as 20 ounces of calcium hypochlorite. That will give you 10 parts per million in 10,000 gallons of water.
So a little bit less than 2 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that's about more than 1 pound.
Right. Okay.
So
that's about what I experienced. So that's good to know.
Now your cloud, why did we get a cloud?
Well, from what I've been reading about, when I read comments and posts about people that are familiar with Cal Hypo, the only thing that I can assume is that my alkalinity was already pretty high in the pools, or the pH, or both. No?
Yeah.
Okay. You made a face like I was saying it wrong.
You caused cloudy water by creating a scale-forming saturation in your pool.
Would that have been the same thing as adding calcium chloride and bicarb in the pool at the same time? Because that clouds up, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you did give it a quick boost in pH, right? Which we know a higher pH can tend to make the water cloudy for those same reasons. You added a little bit more calcium to the water. And then, yeah, to your point, if your total alkalinity was high enough, then you could also see calcium carbonate form, which would then cloud the water and eventually precipitate out. So that
was my next question, because I've had some powder left over, which some lady freaked out and threw me off her property over because she insisted that
my house.
Oh my God, I'm going to have to tell you the story off the air if I haven't already. But anyway.
No.
I don't want to talk about it.
Inquiring minds inquire. You don't want to talk about it. It was that bad?
Yeah, it was bad. She was real mean and insulting. Going to ruin her pool and why it wasn't chlorine, but she didn't want to hear it. Surface, shock sitting. And like I said, I couldn't explain to her why it was shock. So that's what it is then. That's the calcium chloride just like precipitating out because the pH super high or the alkalinity was super high.
Like silica sand through the sand filter. These are the days of Andrea's life.
Wow. Okay. What a soap opera you got going on. But we're going to go back to calcium hypochlorite for a minute. First, what likely would have solved your problem? You are correct. Going with a lower target total alkalinity probably would have took care of the whole thing. Okay. So I would have shot for somewhere maybe around 60, 70 parts per million at the highest
for
using
alkalinity.
Calcium hypochlorite. Then you don't tend to get as much of a cloud. Having a lower target total alkalinity could have taken care of it for you. I'm also going to guess this was probably in one of the warmer months when this had occurred, maybe mid-August to mid-September.
Yeah, it was last year, so yeah, about that time. It was around that.
And that's going to be about the hottest the water temperature is in your area.
And it was way out west.
Jacks it up a little bit too. It was way out west?
Way out west, fully exposed to the sun.
There's no way out west in Florida.
Have you never been to Okeechobee?
To the swamp?
I guess. Yeah, there's swamps.
So we put in the calcium hypochlorite. What else did we add to the water? We said we got 10 parts of free chlorine from a 20-ounce dose of cal hypo. What else did we get from that? We
raised the pH, but we also are contributing calcium to the water.
And the pH increase should only be temporary. So, Andrew, if you wait it out, it should come back down on its own.
And does the lye thing, that's not a thing with the cal hypo, right? They don't.
No. Okay. They're not adding extra excess or anything like that. So
the cal hypo is just burning off, the hypochlorous acid burns off, and then the pH goes back to close to what it was.
About where it started.
Okay.
Maybe a hair higher, but pretty much back to where it started.
Gotcha.
You know, unless you're adding a consistent dose daily, that just kind of keeps it up and doesn't give it a chance to come down. But the minute it gets a chance to, it just drops back down.
Okay.
So, but we're also increasing that 20-ounce dose will also increase your calcium hardness by 8 parts per million.
Okay.
And your total dissolved solids, because everything increases total dissolved solids by 15 parts per million.
Was that more than the liquid hypochlorite or sodium hypochlorite? I can't remember.
No, sodium hypochlorite is going to increase the total dissolved solids by the most. And again, that was 28 parts per million.
Isn't that interesting? Because it's liquid. I can think of an area right now where I had a pool service where I don't think cal hypo would be good, just because they're known for having high calcium in the water. So,
yeah, if the water's coming out of the tap with a high calcium hardness level, why would you want to add more to it?
I agree. I would not want to.
Okay, so Andrew, I hope.
Our whole show was your question.
We're not done yet, but I hope this answered your question. And I hope you never end up like Andrea, getting shot at out in the swamp by some woman who hates powder.
She hated me.
Okay.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's a true statement. Yes.
password.